right, my dear friends. Welcome to a global read. My name is Felipe, and I am here with Charter for Compassion. We also have the wonderful pleasure to be hosting in our global read. The book for today's global read is A Case for Compassion: What Happens When We Prioritize People and the Planet. This book was written by Sara Schairer, who is here with us, the author, and the conversation will be moderated by my good friend, Babalan Kongolo, who lives in South Africa and is part of the Charter for Compassion Board of Trustees. Thank you so much, Babalwa. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. And with that, I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Felipe. Thank you for that introduction and welcome to this conversation that I am so excited about. Today's global read, we are joined by Sara Schairer. And I feel very fortunate to be, part of this conversation and being able to hold and share space with you today, because, just the work that you've done is incredible, particularly in the space of compassion. And I'm going to read a little bit of your bio before we start so people get a sense of who you are and what you've done. Sara is the founder and executive director of Compassionate, which is a nonprofit organization and global social movement whose mission is to inspire daily compassionate actions and attitudes. Sara is also a senior facilitator of the Compassion Cultivation Training course that was developed at Stanford University and has spent 10 years leading trainings globally for audiences of all walks of life. Sara is also the author of this beautiful book that is going to be on the table for discussion today, A Case for Compassion. And I'm so excited to speak about it because the book really delves into a space that I'm really interested in, which is systems and systems change. And so I'm really, really excited to welcome you today, Sara. Welcome to today's Global Read.
Oh, thank you. It's really an honor to be here. And thanks to all of you who are joining us as well. I'm excited about this conversation.
Absolutely. I want to, as someone who has been in the compassionate space for over 10 years, I really want to get a sense of what your definition of compassion is, because compassion comes to us in all different ways. And I think our understanding of compassion shifts, changes, and begins to get more meaning the more we do this work. And so I'm really interested to find out how you define compassion, particularly with the people that you work with and encounter.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's important that we're all on the same page with what compassion is, because it's different than empathy. It's not the same thing as kindness. And the definition I like to use is what I teach through Stanford's Compassion Cultivation Training course, CCT. And it's a cascade of events. So compassion begins with noticing suffering. So you notice someone's suffering, and then you feel that you resonate with that suffering. So that's the empathy piece. You're moved, you have a desire to help, and then you have a willingness to take action to alleviate the suffering.
That's a beautiful movement. But I think it's quite interesting when you speak to compassion almost being conditioned on this idea of suffering. And I think it's so interesting that it's not only just conditioned on that idea of suffering, but it also provides an imperative of having to act. I think that's such a beautiful way to think about it. I think we're in a world that's facing a lot of suffering, on a global scale, on a system scale, on a personal scale. I want to find out from you, just in terms of that idea of suffering, how does compassion play into our ways of dealing with the suffering that we see within the world, within the systems, within ourselves even?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to define suffering here too before I answer that question, because oftentimes we think of suffering as it's the worst thing ever, it's obvious, I'm like bleeding, right? And suffering, the way that we teach it, or the way I've been taught to teach it and the way I teach it, is that suffering is whenever there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be. So if you want something you can't get, or you get something you don't want, you're suffering, right? So it's not necessarily, or oftentimes it's not something you can see. How many of us wish we had something we don't have? How many of us wish we didn't get something that we got, right? So what it means is that most of us are suffering a lot of the, really all of us are suffering a lot of the time, unless you're one of those lucky people that's just content in every moment, right? So there are many, many, many opportunities to be compassionate with each other, because we can recognize, I don't know what you are worried about, Babs, but I can guess that there's something in your life that's creating suffering. You're worried about something, right? So that's an opportunity for me to show up with compassion. So compassion is looking at this from a personal point of view. My neighbors I encounter, every person that I interact with, I can make the assumption that there's someone that I can offer compassion to. But this is not something that is that our systems allow us to do well, which is why I really tackled the systems topic in my book, because you might be, our doctors, our healthcare providers, they want to be compassionate to their patients. They want to give us time and their attention. But the way that the system is set up, at least in the US, they're behind computers typing the whole time. They can't really engage as well and be present. They're on a very strict timeline because they have too many patients to see and not enough time. So the system doesn't allow for the compassion to happen. So I'm asking us to, well, let's look at the systems level so that we can say, all right, how can we develop systems that allow individuals to be compassionate to each other? So that's one aspect. I don't even know if I answered your question, but I certainly said a lot there.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful start, because I think we exist in systems, we live in systems, and to varying degrees we're comfortable with them, perhaps sometimes we're not. And particularly when we're navigating systems, we're also navigating power. We're also navigating our own identities. We're navigating our own sense of compassion, right? And so I think when we start to think about what it means to incorporate compassion into the systems, I think we're always challenged by how the system exists. And I love the book because it gives us really practical examples of what that might be, right? But I'm curious to just know, in terms of what is in the book, but also within your own experiences, what are some of those practical steps towards engaging the system and introducing compassion into it? Particularly in a system, as you've said, that doesn't necessarily allow us to do that.
Well, it depends on your role in the system, right? So I don't have a job with the government. So there's not a whole lot I can do at a systems level. I'm not the president. I'm not a senator. I don't have a lot of power to create policies that are compassionate. My power is my vote. So I can seek out the candidates that I know prioritize compassion and are creating policies that prioritize compassion. So that's my job, as my role in that. Now I may have, if I'm an HR director of a company, maybe I have a little bit of power to talk to the leaders to say, look, let's look at our HR practices. What does family leave look like? What happens when someone loses a family member here? Or whatever the case is, there are certain HR practices that you can put in place to create more compassion. But if you're on the lower rung at a company, you don't really have the power to make those changes. So you're going to have to practice your compassion at work, maybe more on an individual level with your colleagues, or plant seeds with your boss or your manager. So it sort of depends on where we fall, but I always think that there is an opportunity to influence systems no matter where you are. It just, there's not like a blanket statement like do this. It just depends. If you have power, if you're a leader, you can make a lot of, I have a lot of hope for you, right? It's not me. I don't have any power, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know. But we need people in power who can make changes at a systems level to do the right thing and make create more compassionate systems.
Mm, mm, absolutely. To me, I think the invitation to use our power wherever it is, right, within the system, because we do play different roles, and to call on our need for compassion in different spaces. I think it's also quite important to really think through that idea of how each and every one of us suffers. We know what suffering is. And I think that's such a powerful way to then connect possibly within our spaces as much as we can. My interest at this moment is how you came to this work of compassion, because, you know, there are so many different avenues that you could have taken your work, but you focused particularly on compassion. And obviously at the Charter for Compassion, that is at the core of the work that we do. But I'm really interested. I always find it interesting finding out what has brought people to this particular work.
Thank you for that question. Compassion came to me. It wasn't something that I was seeking out. Back in 2000, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it short if I can. But many years ago, in 2008, I was really struggling in my life. My daughter was a little over a year old. I had quit my job to be home with her, and my husband at the time had told me he wanted a divorce. And if you were in the US in 2008, we were in the middle of an economic fallout. So I could not find a job. And I was a mess. This was not my type A plan for my life. This was not it. This was not part of it. So I really was in a bad place, crying a lot, and I was struggling. And I also watched a lot of television during that time while my daughter was sleeping. And I caught an Ellen show, and she was featuring an author named Wayne Dyer, who was talking about compassion. And he said, it's the most important lesson to teach our kids. That if we could teach our children compassion, we would solve the social problems of the planet. And I had never really thought about compassion and its power before. I heard him say that, and I could not stop thinking about it. And that very evening, the word compassionate appeared as two words in my head, compassionate. And I was like, oh, that's so clever. It's like, just do it or Google it, right? It makes compassion a verb. And I thought I saw it as a sticker, like it would be a bumper sticker, like coexist. We have these coexist stickers here in the US. But anyway, I thought it would be like a cool, but clever bumper sticker. And so I got the trademark, and then for a few years just kept postponing it. And it took me a few years to get my life back on track. And in the meantime, I was compassioning it in my own life. And I found, wow, this little phrase is very powerful. When I remember to compassion it, things just go so much more smoothly, whether it was dealing with a tricky client or a grumpy boss or my daughter or my ex-husband. When I centered compassion, things went better. And so I got pretty obsessed with compassion, found out about Stanford's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, and then was fortunate enough to get enrolled in the first cohort to be trained to teach their 8-week course. Anyway, so this was back in 2012. And it went from a bumper sticker to these wristbands that you flip every time you compassion it or self-compassion it. To Compassionate became a nonprofit, and we teach compassion in various settings. So that's the story of how it got, I caught the bug. It came, compassion it is what appeared in my mind. And I've been kind of, just following the lead of compassion ever since.
Beautiful. And then how do we get to this wonderful book that we're here to discuss today?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the book came, I was a journalism major in school, so I've been writing for a while, and I always kind of thought I would write a book, and I thought it would be about how to compassionate, right? Like different practices and what have you. And as I thought about it, there are so many books out there already on how to practice compassion for ourselves and for others, and by really amazing teachers, like the gurus of compassion, like, Sharon Salzberg or Kristen Neff. And I'm like, I don't know if I need to write that book. That book's out there. But what I didn't see out there was a book that addressed systems. And I've been doing this work for, it had been over 10 years when I started writing the book. And I'm like, gosh, I've trained thousands and thousands of people on compassion. And when I look around at our society, I don't see a difference. So we need to stop just training individuals. We need this at a systems level. So I thought the book could help us all think, more broadly and zoom out and look more at systems. And I really think if we want to make real change, it's got to be at that level.
Absolutely, I agree with you. There's something powerful, I think, about seeing where the need is, and I love that the book caters to where you saw the need was, because that conversation about how we shift systems, I think, is definitely top of mind. We've, as you've said, people have been doing this work for so long. We've been doing it for so long. And every time you see a new story about war, or you see a new story about genocide, or you see a new story about conflict, you're always just moved to think, at least I am, about, where is the compassion in that space? What has led to such a breakdown in understanding, and in compassion and in connection and in empathy? And so I love that there is this book which provides so beautifully this case, I guess, for compassion, which tells us that our systems can change. While going through the book, I think I was inspired by how many people have incorporated compassion. And it's very difficult to convince people that your business, your organization, your school could really use compassion. And I'm curious how you're able to connect with your clients, connect with the people that you work with, to really share the message of how compassion is able to shift systems, and to bring about, some of the things that they want to see. Sometimes we're so focused, especially in a business context, on the bottom line, or we're, focused on the next project. So how do we do that work of prioritizing compassion when it is competing with so many other priorities within our systems?
I wish I had a clear answer to that question, but I don't know yet. I'm figuring it out, because you're right. It's hard to convince people. It's hard to go and say, hey, I have an idea. Let's just look at all your systems and make them more compassionate. It's not like people, it appears as if most organizations aren't like, oh, we know what our problem is. We don't have enough compassion. They're not seeking out this work. So what I'm trying to do through the book, and then I want to do like some case studies on other organizations that are employing compassion more, to show people, look at these outcomes that are happening, the positive results, the increased revenue, the lower employee turnover, all these things that you want. If you're a healthy organization, compassion can help you get there. But I really need to show more examples. And then my theory, we'll see if it works. My theory is that if I can work closely with leaders on how to be compassionate leaders, they'll see the benefit of compassion. And then they're the ones who have, as I said, power to make some changes. So I'm in the process of getting a leadership coaching certification so that I can work more closely with leaders on this, and then hope that will then inspire them to want to change systems. So this is a long game. I wish I had like just do X, Y, and Z, and we can get in there and change these systems. And maybe somebody else does have that answer. This is still new new for me because I lead a lot of compassion trainings in organizations, but it's very much for the individuals to learn or teams to learn how to work with each other. It's not saying, all right, let's take out all your HR practices line by line, figure out how can we make this more compassionate, right? So I haven't gotten to that point yet, but that's the direction that I'm trying to go.
Yeah, I think it's so tricky to get people to see it. But I love that you've spoken just about, some of those outcomes that we want are so closely linked to our ability to be compassionate. If you think about culture, work culture is so closely linked to people being able to be compassionate within, the workspace. Even in our own homes, compassion plays such a positive role in the way that we're able to connect. I just think about, particularly in my own, today actually was quite a busy day for me. I flew down from my parents' home, which is about an hour and a half by flight, and I've come down to Cape Town today. And I just thought about what it means to leave, my aging parents alone there and come and do this work. And I think for me, when I think about what life asks of us, what society asks of us, it's often such a tug of war. And it's such a push and pull. And I think always wanting to find how to move towards compassion is always, it's always a tug, right? It's the tug of war. And so I think I asked that previous question because I think so many people, particularly young people, are trying to figure out, how do I build decisions that are featured, that are focused on compassion? How do I build that into my decision making? How do I build that into the job that I choose? How do I build that into the partner that I choose, or what type of activism to do? And I'm just wondering, in your own journey, what has compelled you and what has allowed you to continuously reach for compassion and to reach for decisions that allow you to better be part of a compassionate way of being, a compassionate way of learning or working, of being part of a family unit? What are those for you?
I'll say practice, first of all. For many years, I've been meditating, and I've been doing a lot of compassion meditations I do believe they've changed my brain. I mean, there's research that indicates that meditation does change the brain, and these practices have strengthened my compassion muscles. Those muscles exist. We all have them, but the practices, like, taking your brain to the gym and just exercising them more and more. So now it's more of a part of my life just naturally because of that. And I will say also, not to like plug my product, but when you're wearing something that says compassionate on there, it's really hard to be a jerk. It's like, either I'm going to wear the hypocrite wristband on this side and be a jerk to you and flip that one, or I'm going to be kind to you and myself, right? It's important that during all of this, what can be tricky with people who make compassion a focus in their lives is that they're only thinking about others, and they're not setting that boundary of self-compassion. And so Brene Brown's research indicates the most compassionate people actually have the strongest boundaries. So what do I need to do to also take care of myself? I need to make sure I'm practicing meditation. I need to make sure I'm exercising and eating well and doing the things that fuel me so that I can show up present and willing to face the suffering of those around me. So I do believe it's practice, it's intention, it's the humility to know that I don't always know what to do if someone's suffering, right? That's something I think we need to talk about more in the compassion space, is the willingness to be humble and say, I don't know. But I also just love it. I am such a fan. I've seen the results myself of how this has impacted my own life. So it's hard when you see, I mean, when I see my own life changing for the better because of this way of living, why would I not continue that? Right. So I think it's something that I encourage everyone, just try. See what happens when you make compassion a priority in your life. It's pretty, from my experience, it's astounding. It is life changing.
I love that. I love the thought of being compassionate to self. I think that is so such a big component of being able to show up. I also just want to speak more about that point of humility. I think it's so difficult, particularly as as someone who's been doing this work for so long. I'm sure lots of people look to you and they just want to know how do I do this? I think about even in the context of what we're seeing in, for example, Sudan, and what we're seeing in the Congo, and what we're seeing in Palestine. We're constantly having to confront so much suffering. And I think are so overwhelmed by how much suffering there is, not just, in global news, but even in our own personal lives, in our own workplaces, in our own organizations. And so for me, I find that question of how to come to a space with the intention of compassion, but having to also hold the humility of, well, I don't know. I don't know how to respond. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear more about how we can do better in terms of holding that.
Yeah, I think this is something that I learned the most from Joan Halifax. Roshi Joan Halifax taught me a lot about humility and compassion. So I wanted to just call that out. I think we think compassion means fixing, and it doesn't. There's the definition that I shared. It said there's a willingness to act. I didn't say we act, right? So like, I wish we have a severe problem with homelessness in San Diego, where I live. And I don't have the means or the power to do anything substantial about it. And I pass by folks all the time who are unhoused. And I know that there's nothing I can do. But what I can do is see the person as a human and smile and send compassionate thoughts and donate to organizations who do have the means and the wisdom to do the right thing. And again, vote for people who care about this community too. But I think I am comfortable knowing, like, I can't just go out and give everyone a home. I don't have that power. Another example I'll share is that recently I sat down with a very good friend of mine who is Jewish, and he shared with me his struggles right now, and how hard it is to be Jewish in the United States. And there is nothing I can do about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. I have zero power, and I am also humble enough to know I don't quite understand the history of it all. Like, it's so complicated. So many of these conflicts are complicated. And what I told him, what I stand for is peace. I don't want anyone harmed. I don't feel comfortable choosing sides. I don't feel comfortable having my organization choose sides. We care about peace and the lives of everyone involved. And so that I don't try to pretend like I know the answers. And I think it's okay as long as I'm willing to be present with his suffering and open my heart to the suffering that's happening around the world and in my own home, within myself, that's the piece of compassion. I'm willing to be there. I'm in my presence alone with a dear friend, just being fully present with him and listening with an open heart and open mind. That's my practice of compassion right there, right? That's compassion in action.
It's such a, thank you so much for that answer. I think it's so beautifully centers us around what really matters, right? That heart to heart, that ability to rehumanize people, that sometimes we can dehumanize in different ways, with labels, with terms, with circumstances. And so I think it's so important to be able to do that. I also know that it can be so difficult. I was watching one of your talks, I don't know if it's a recent one, I think it's a 2017 one, and it was quite interesting because you spoke about Susan Fink's theory around unconscious biases and how they influence us. And you spoke about just this theory that speaks to how we categorize people according to whether they have high power or they have or they don't have power. And whether we, from a specific position, see them as warm or cold, or in a way that I like to unpack it is whether we are able to like them or dislike them. I think it's easier, it's so much simpler for us to show compassion to people we agree with, to show compassion to people who are like us, who share very similar struggles, whose suffering we're able to resonate with, more closely with. I think what's been even harder that we've been seeing, particularly at this moment, is how difficult it is to do that for people who we possibly dislike or probably disagree with, or who we just find to even completely go against what we believe. And so I think there's so much I think that needs to be said about how we hold compassion for ourselves as people who see things from a specific perspective, and how we do the very difficult work of holding compassion even for people that we disagree with, or people that we are unable to find a commonality with. That is, I think, it's such a difficult one to navigate, especially as people who work in the space, especially as people who want to do the work of compassion. That's just it's a deep wondering of mine, and I'm just curious to know how at this moment we can respond, having to balance both of those two things, compassion for myself and compassion for possibly people who I don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah, I think there are a few ways of looking at this. One is knowing that compassion for everyone, which includes maybe someone who has harmed me or someone I love, that is an aspiration, right? I think if you make that your lifelong goal, that's beautiful. I think it's asking a lot to, not that I don't think it's possible, but I don't want people to think like, oh, I have to have compassion for this person who has harmed me so terribly. Like, I think it can be tricky. And so I say, you know what, that's like, what a great goal to have, that someday maybe I can have compassion for everyone on the planet, right? That's something to work toward. But another part that I think is really important when we're talking about compassion, this distinction about what compassion is. Compassion does not condone harmful behavior. So if I'm having compassion for someone, it doesn't mean that I'm allowing them to continue harming others or me or themselves, right? So compassionate people do not stand for that. It's not allowing harmful behavior, right? We separate the human from their actions. So this human being I can see as just like me, this little infant, innocent baby whose life was molded by their upbringing and society and made them act the way they act, right? I can say this human being, gosh, it's not their fault that they're acting this way. I don't want them to act this way. I don't want to allow that to happen. But I have compassion. I want to alleviate their suffering. Because imagine how many content, happy terrorists are out there in the world. Right? So in theory, you know, in my mind, that's how I can say, this is why I can have compassion for this person who has harmed so many. I can see them as a human being like me. And I wish for them to be free from suffering. That doesn't mean that I wish for them to continue harming other people. So, and again, and I think your point about self-compassion is so important too. Like, how hard is this for me to, this act of wanting to have compassion for people who have harmed and to be willing to be present with the realities of what's happening. That's really a hard thing. To not just bury my head in a phone or drink 3 glasses of wine every night, right? Like I could escape, but I'm willing to stay present with suffering instead. And that deserves compassion for myself. One more thing that I just thought of. I love the lesson of non-harming. So sometimes the most compassionate thing I can do is to, if it's somebody, you know, who's really challenging my compassion, maybe my compassion looks like not harming them. Right? So maybe I'm not quite ready to alleviate their suffering, but I can take the step of not harming them. I don't know. I know there's a lot in the chat. Are we supposed to be looking at that, or is that something that we're going to deal with later?
I was going to jump to the chat right now.
Okay, cool.
But I did want to sort of glaze over what you just said, because I think it's really important to, I think what you've introduced is this idea that compassion is an entry point. It's a powerful entry point to doing the rest of the work. And sometimes once you enter, you recognize that, okay, I can't actually clean everything up. Maybe today I just witness. Maybe today I just share a moment with whoever's in the room. But you know, if the smallest thing I can do is not harm, I think that's a powerful principle to think to work with, to think through, as we sort of navigate terrain that is very, very, very difficult. Yeah. I'm going to go to a question quickly, just from the chat. I think this is from Facebook. And the question is, what is the connection between compassion and justice? Love that. Sarah, you mentioned how individuals can exercise compassion within the healthcare system. How can compassion transform the corporatized profit motive in our system to ensure well-being for everyone? That is from Karen Ball.
Yes, I can. I'll click the second question. I can answer pretty easily. Well, not easily, but in my book, I do highlight this really wonderful company in the Basque region of Spain called Mondragon. And it's a huge, like tens of thousands of employees co-op, all these different companies that are under this umbrella. And they have certain practices in place that, like, for example, if you're the CEO of one of the companies, you can't make more than 6 times, I believe it's the lowest employee's salary range. So they do a great job of equalizing salaries. In the US, the S&P 500, when I wrote the book a couple years ago, the employee to CEO pay ratio was 1 to 299. So the CEO was making 299 times what the average employee was making. That is insane. So I know it's asking a lot, but I think if our organizations could say, look, what's enough? This idea of enoughness is like a big thing for Mondragon. They're saying, hey, I have enough. I'm the CEO. I have enough. And I can pay you enough so that you can send your kids to college. You can go on 3 weeks of vacation. You can own a home and a car, and you're taken care of because we care about our employees and we care about our communities. Now, how can we change the US corporate system to be more that way? I don't know. I believe it's possible. And like companies like Patagonia, I mean, there are some really good companies out there that are based here that B Corps, I think are doing the right thing. So I think it's possible. I don't have, again, like I don't know for sure how to get that going other than to share these other examples and say, look what happens when, I don't know, the people at the top, do they need that much? Why? It seems like we should have some regulations in place around how much money folks are making. But I am humble enough to know I don't know enough about that world to say. And the connection between compassion and justice, I have to think about that more. Babs, do you have a thought about that?
I do, but I would love to hear your thoughts first. And before I head there, I just wanted to say, I think there's something that you've said, and I've watched in one of your interviews, just where you ask a very powerful question around, but why do we have this business? Why do we have this organization? Is it to make profits? Is it to run a project? Like, what is the purpose of the work that we do? And I think the book also, quite beautifully asks us to really reflect on, particularly as leaders, on why we are doing, what is the motive behind the things that we are doing, the companies that we are running, the organizations that we're a part of, what is centering us. And I think there's a deep deficit in something. If it's not for people, if it's not for the planet, right? If it's not to cater and serve the people that we see. And I just wanted to add that, because I think that's such a powerful way to maybe think through what we're doing. I also think it's really sad that we need policy to have us behave in a way that if we had compassion, we wouldn't need it, right? It really is. It is sad that we have to even go that way. But yeah, I think it's very important to think through that. I think is quite powerful. There is a question from Marge, who said, does gun ownership negate being compassionate? And another one from Marge as well was, any thoughts on compassion towards our environment, which actually is in the book. I think there's a lot of examples on how we can, be more compassionate towards the environment. But yeah, would you like to?
Gosh, I listened to a podcast episode this morning. I listened to the New York Times podcast called The Daily, and today it was on guns and particularly mass shootings in the United States. So I have particular personal feelings around guns, and I, as I said, I stand for peace. I think it's probably okay if you use your gun to hunt and then you eat, you're eating the animal that, it's an animal that maybe is overpopulating your area. And like, I know I'm from Illinois and we have a lot of deer, and hunters shoot them, but then they make whatever, they eat it. So if there's like a purpose, I can see that is okay. I am not a fan of guns. So I don't, it's weird that I feel so odd I'm noticing why that this question makes me nervous. I think because in the United States, people are just feel so strongly about their guns, and you know, I feel strongly against them. And I also know that a lot of people that I grew up with and people in my hometown and, you know, in the Midwest and maybe other parts of the country and the world have different thoughts on them. So I don't want to upset people enough that they are going to like turn away from compassion because of something I've said. I'm noticing that's what is like happening in my mind right now around this topic. I would never have a gun in my house, and I don't want to be around a gun. So I don't know. I'm sorry that that's a weird answer. I'm much happier to talk about compassion for the planet. That feels very comfortable to me. If you think about it, compassion for the planet is actually compassion for the beings on the planet, because the Earth is going to survive whether we're here or not. It's going to do its thing. But if I am taking care of this planet, the planet will take care of me and the other living beings here. So that is what people need to recognize. It's not like, oh, we're caring for the Earth, because the Earth has everything we need. The Earth has all the resources we need to live as healthy, thriving humans. But if we don't take care of her, then she can't take care of us. So it's I do think that compassion for the planet is something that's missing in a lot of compassion conversations, and I hope that we can focus on it more as a movement.
Absolutely agree with you 100%. We have a question from Shane, which is, what is peace as a definition to you, Sarah? I found your definition of suffering and compassion very interesting. And what is peace to you and for our world? I think is a beautiful one.
Peace, in my mind, is the alleviation of suffering. So when I am personally at peace, I don't want anything. And I'm okay with whatever I got. That's peace for me. And I want everyone to feel that way. I want everyone to achieve that feeling of inner peace. But we can't have that if there's a conflict with each other, right? So the inner peace and outer peace work together to create world peace, which, it seems like such an unachievable goal, this idea of world peace, and everybody talks about it. It's kind of like a cliche now, but it seems so simple to me, right? Like, let's just see each other as humans and be kind. I don't, and again, that's like, I can be very naive and say like, world peace, give everybody a compassionate wristband and we're done. All right, just practice this. But anyway, that's my definition of peace.
That is a beautiful definition, the alleviation of suffering. And I think that just goes back to, you can't practice peace without compassion. And I think it also goes back to that question around justice. You cannot have justice if you're not compassionate. And, justice, I think a lot of people also speak to, justice being a precursor for peace. And I think a precursor for justice is compassion. And there's a way to walk, from each of those. And I think our striving for peace it's incomplete if it doesn't start with a compassion, even for those whose suffering we don't necessarily agree with. So I don't know, at least that's my offering to that thought and to as we the time has just gone so fast and I feel like we could talk forever, but I do want to, and I have to, unfortunately, get us to wrap up. And I know that, you know, one of your practices is around mindfulness. And I'm wondering that whether you would be willing to just guide us through a mindful meditation at this point as we close off, as we move on from this conversation. I think you know, we've covered so much that I think speaks to the essence of our humanity. It speaks to the essence of really, really, really what matters when it comes to who we are and how we navigate the world. And I'm hoping that as we leave, we have a moment to center ourselves in what that means for each and every one of us. I really enjoyed that you spoke about how, you know, we can use, or we can participate and practice compassion just in our own spaces, in our own ways, and it's different for everyone. And I would like to invite people to have a moment to really think about what that looks like for themselves as we leave this conversation. So if you don't mind, Sarah.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to. I'll guide us through a brief mindfulness practice that invites us to look at or notice what's happening within our bodies, our emotions, and our minds. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at, and then I'll end with a little self-compassion. So I invite you to find a grounded posture. So feeling your sits bones on your chair or seat and noticing your feet on the ground. And feel free to close the eyes if you'd like, or you can just cast the gaze down, unfocusing the eyes. And let's take a few deep breaths together, exhaling everything out. And taking a big deep breath in through the nose. And a slow exhale out of the mouth. Another big inhale through the nose. And exhaling. And once more inhaling. And exhaling. And now closing the lips and breathing in and out of the nostrils. Relaxing the forehead, the eyes, the jaw. Softening the shoulders and abdomen. And just allowing the body and mind to settle as you focus on the breath. And taking a moment to notice what the mind is up to. Maybe it's reflecting on what you heard during this hour, or maybe it's looking ahead at a to-do list. Just being aware of the mind and bringing it back to the present when you notice it wandering. And taking a moment to notice what emotion is on top for you right now. You labeling that emotion with a word. And tuning into the body. And maybe doing a brief scan from head to toe. Noticing if the body has anything to say. Perhaps allowing your body to inform whatever emotion you're feeling. And taking a moment to place the hand on the heart, or maybe to give yourself what you need right now. If your body is tense, it could be a little massage, or maybe you need a deep breath, or a hand on the belly. taking a moment to offer yourself compassion. And also offering yourself gratitude, thanking yourself for showing up today and for caring so deeply about our world. And with that hand on the heart, taking one more deep breath in and breath out. And setting an intention to bring this compassion forward through the rest of your day or your evening. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thanks, everybody.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I know if you could just share where we can get a copy of your book. Also just a link to your website, and I'll hand over to Felipe.
You can find the book anywhere you find books. So Barnes & Noble or Amazon, also on our webpage, which oh, look at that. There we go. You find it in all kinds of places. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for just taking the time to share such deep wisdom just about your own journey and about the work that you do. And it's such an inspiration to hear how you've navigated. And I think as we all go back into our different spaces, as we think about how we can just implant compassion into our systems, into, you know, everywhere we are, I'm just grateful that we had this chance to engage with you and to learn so much from you. Thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for encouraging us to compassion it.
Thank you, Babs. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
thank you
Sarah.
both. And thank you, Babs, for moderating and for the questions that you asked, and for the audience also for participating and asking questions. This really was a beautiful global read, and how inspiring to be able to explore compassion in a different lens. So thank you for that, Sarah. I would love to share my screen really quickly for people to know that there are some offerings that the Charter is providing to everyone. First of all, every first Tuesday of the month, we are hosting a new initiative with Crossing Borders Education. It's called Empathic Dialogue Cafes. And these are an hour long, the first Tuesday of the month. The sessions are inspired, built on inspiring podcasts, and give you safe space to share, connect, and build character strength and life skills. Again, this is free, 1 hour a month, the first Tuesday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 Eastern, 5 p.m. UK, 9:30 in India. The registrations are open. We also have our Sangha, which is the last Saturday every month. So this case is June 29th at 9 a.m. Pacific, a time to meditate, a time to mindfulness, for sharing, for silence, for building communion with all of us here at the Charter. And then we also have the healthcare sector. We have the kitchen table chats that happens every first Friday of the month. So this next one will be on July 5th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. The Magic Ability of Music to Inspire Action is the webinar that Marilyn does every Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific. This is, we listen to different kinds of music and inspire us to take action in a specific way. Very nicely moderated by Marilyn, our executive director. And last but not least, our next global read is on the book, Why Peace and Prayers Are Not Enough. And this was written by Reverend Julie Brenton Rowe. And this conversation will be facilitated by another member of the board, a trustee, Reverend Ann Helmke from San Antonio, Texas. And with that, my friends, I thank you once again for both of you for this incredible conversation, for everyone that participated on the questions and in the comments in the chat. Truly appreciate it. This conversation will be on our YouTube channel later on, so that you can share this or rewatch it if you want to. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll be seeing you in our next global read on July 31st, I'm thinking. I will keep you posted. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.